Hi, my name is Nancy Fulton. I currently run events for more than 40,000 entertainment industry pros. And today I'm speaking with Scott Hadley Morgan, who is a writer producer who helps people create content for global marketplaces and who helps people put together co-productions and productions for China. So with that in mind, Scott, do you want to start talking for a few minutes about how you started working to create content with and for China?
Sure. First, I want to say that the previous interview with you on screenwriting has brought some really fantastic comments by people. I've had some fun meetings with them. And as I opened up the last meeting, I talked a little bit about appropriate appearance and the things that work culturally with China is especially important. The suit I'm wearing right here might be popular in Hong Kong and Chengdu, which gets very humid. They're linen suits. They allow the light colors, especially in Chengdu and also in Shanghai. Most of them do like to dress up in suits and wear black or dark blue, but they appreciate style. And the shirt is a linen shirt from Thailand that breathes very well in the heat there. A lot of people, it's kind of funny. They show up and they're just melting before these interviews because they haven't felt the humidity of Hong Kong. But it's wonderful. So I want to thank you for the really wonderful comments before. And let me see. I actually started by going to Hong Kong at first with Jean-Claude Van Damme in the movie The Quest. As you know, my story of going underground there with the transition into China Rule. And then over to Thailand. And I came back several years later to help orphans there in Vietnam and Thailand. And I began my association with people in Singapore. And it was on my about third visit that I crossed paths with some friends from Hollywood, amazingly, in Hong Kong. And I said, "Oh, are you here for movie funding?" And they said, "No, that's not where the money is. The money is in rebuilding these theaters here. They have several thousand. We're updating it to THX and really nice seating. And this really shows that they're really going to go for, at the time, they said they're going to go for 8,000 theaters. Now I think they have 30,000. But that opened my mind to this idea that China is going to become one of the great leaders in film. I was also keenly aware of China's progress, both financially and politically, and knew that this was part of a few years later, President Xi's election and his plans, and his 2 5-year plans. Well, when I was over in Shanghai in 2014, I really started to settle into the public sentiment and the business sentiment having to do with entertainment. Now, the purpose of this video is really for, to an extent, writers, but really for producers, mini majors, virtual studios, major players over there that have told me, for instance, that when I've met with them, they said, "Hey, I went over to China. I was completely confused. I had no idea what I did right or wrong." And then I started to read the trades and started to follow and track the deals. And I realized then that I needed to go over to China myself and use my connections to confidentially meet with some of these studios. So this is really for any Hollywood production company, funding company, especially ones that might end up meeting with Alibaba and Tencent here now that they have offices, want to set up deals or have existing deals and they want to fill their slate. Now, to explain a little bit of my insight, why it's so unique. First, we have this book, which I showed last time, which is The Future of China Hollywood Film Collaboration. I'd say half of the book is what does China want, and the other half is explaining to them what's going on in Hollywood, which you and I covered in the last interview, these massive changes. And just a couple of titles in here. Can Television Be Saved? We mentioned before. Why Asia? Why Now? Different ways that China ends up viewing our influence, which led to some interviews with some magazines over there where I was giving really the straight information about Hollywood. And now, while I was over there, in many of my opening meetings, in the first 15 minutes, the executives, who were very attentive and just wonderful people to be with, very committed, they would say, "We need help a lot with the imagination aspects. We have a knowledge of where we are, and many people would say it might take us 10 years to really get into the full swing of our imagination to create our original content. Now, I would tell them, one, you don't have 10 years, and two, it's not true. It's in you somewhere. And the problem was that Hollywood would come to them and the business world would come to them with basically a Western philosophy. And that's fine when it comes to bookkeeping. But China is motivated by many more things other than the sort of bookkeeping, especially Hollywood bookkeeping. The ideas that we bring to creativity that makes a story in Hollywood universally appealing to the world, it is duplicated all the time in many countries that have breakthrough films. The Academy Award Foreign Film category is a very good example. And I could cite some examples, but what I realized was that our wording for leading them is largely ineffective because it has no attachment to the cultural stories and goals and almost no understanding of the direction of the citizenship as well as the leadership there. So this began a massive work of mine that's over 500 pages long. It's the 2 volumes of these books, One Fish Says to Another Fish. This is based on a Chinese parable, and it is filled with references to stories that the Chinese people heard when they were growing up, because the greatest unifying force in any nation in the history of civilization hasn't been money or soldiers. It's always been the stories that unite them, that motivate them to trust their neighbor, to help their neighbor, and to find some way to immortalize what makes us better people. Now, this is supremely important to China.
So actually, if you don't mind, I want to interrupt just for a second. So you are indicating that the standard, the stories that we tell, and from a Western perspective, and you're basically saying that people who are currently writing in Hollywood and who are creating content, having been steeped in Western culture for their entire lives, when they go to China, they don't understand that there's a different bedrock of underlying stories and cultural norms and ways of expressing themselves. There's a different, their hero's journey looks different than the hero's journey that we use, in the sense that they have a different set of fundamental archetypes. Is that what you're communicating?
A little bit. Let's say that's 25% of it, and it applies to certain stories that they would love to see. They still loosely follow the hero with 1,000 faces setup. It is more the symbolism in the background or the assumption of characters that work with the Chinese people, their idea of comedy or of a hero. Hollywood was baffled with the success of The Monkey King. It's because they just have spent almost no time studying how Chinese people, going all the way back to I Ching and Tao, and then the unity under the different dynasties, found inner strength by the observance of nature, for instance. We'll get a little bit more into that, but you are right. What we reference, and even the body language of animated characters, is different for their culture. Yet this is not the main obstacle. It was the obstacle in how we approach business. For them, it is relationship, fundamentals, and then contracts. For us, it's contracts, systems, and finally relationship. And the other information, that I have deals specifically with technology age, especially with an emphasis on art and media.
Just to be clear, you said something really interesting. You said that we have 2 sort of fundamental methodologies to getting to contracts. You said that they start with relationships.
In China, what would happen is I would meet people and they'd say, come join me for dinner, meet my family, tell us about your life, do you have children? They really want to know who they're with. Some people complain about the endless dinners that they have to attend in China when they forge a relationship, but by them hosting you to eat is the most fundamental way that people would invite foreigners to join their culture. And the appreciation of finding common stories or grains of truth from these meetings are what they're looking for, very much as if a Chinese person came here and they're trying to speak English, and we're looking for the phrases they get right, and helping them with the ways that they can improve communication. This is really a cultural blend, where you're learning the importance, and I'll put it kind of simply, they for the most part had a one-child family, and now they have two, and they're going to allow three. But it made their dedication to education and being honorable citizens the most important thing in their life, because they wanted their child to be happy, successful, and have children of their own. And now that they've opened up their society to the internet and to global learning, their emphasis on teaching virtuous actions to their children is much stronger than ours. And it's just so fun to see. It's just delightful.
It must be kind of a shock to them when they're dealing with sort of standard Hollywood culture, which you're right. And we've all noticed it, that Hollywood tends to, you create a deal, and then it's almost like all the people involved are cogs in a machine and infinitely replaceable. Actors are constantly telling me, well, I only ever get brought in at the last possible second, and nobody cares what my thoughts are. There's no time for rehearsal. There's no time for preparation. It's just turn up on stage, and I'm as good as any other actor. My role could be offered to anybody else because I'm not integral to the project. I'm just a cog in a machine. And what you're indicating is that that's how Hollywood treats, when they're working with China. They don't really care about, China's just another cog in the machine. You're just part of the funding equation. You're just the target market equation. We don't want a long-term relationship. We're not trying to think about the long term. We're just thinking about right here, right now, this contract, and really only until the contract is signed and the money's been distributed, and then we're kind of done with this equation. Is that right?
Very, very well said. Now, this isn't demeaning to Hollywood. This is the machine that we are in. You and I talked about that in the last interview, and you have to be realistic about it. Now, one of the things that gave me a specific advantage over pretty much anybody is who my father was. When he retired, he was listed in the Wall Street Journal in a glorious article as the last incorruptible man on Wall Street, and he traveled the world with specifically NASDAQ or commodities. And he he gave me an education in global finance, currency, and trade, the insider look of what happens in the SEC and all these other factors. This is supremely important to China because of their two exchanges, the Hong Kong and the Shanghai, how they're different. And then the second advantage I had was I was helping orphans there, and I was meeting people in the street. And this is where one of my fun stories comes in. It was 2014, and the first thing that happened that I knew was different is I was walking the streets of Shanghai a lot, past Bund, in Puxi and Pudong, and I'd be waiting for the light to change, or I'd be standing in line at a coffee shop, and a Chinese youth, usually in their teens or early 20s, would want to speak English, and they didn't want to talk about who is popular in pop music. They'd say, "What do you think of our president, President Xi?" And I'm like, well, they were surprised I knew anything about him and his push right then to end corruption and to open up the country, what they call communism with new characteristics, this great trust that he put in young people to explore the world, use it to increase the zixi, which is the usable knowledge of their mind. And it was then that I knew something very special and different was happening. It happened so many times I couldn't even count. Now, this leads to another story. This was fantastic. It happened in Hong Kong. I was down in Hong Kong, it was spring, and one of those rains that can only happen in Hong Kong that are just so torrential. It's like people are pouring buckets of water. Hit me. I was in the Chungking House across from Kowloon, and I ran for shelter underneath an awning that was near some small stores that sold tourist goods. And I get caught under there next to a garbage man, and he's about 30. And and he spoke English, and we're talking, first thing out of his mouth, after asking me where I'm from, which is California, there's a pause, and he looks over and he says, "What's up with your crazy president and his monetary policy? Doesn't he know that the yuan can't stay pegged to that?" And I was stunned. And I said, "Exactly, right." And we get into this talk, and he says, "Oh my gosh, primary economics, this and that." And I said, "It's going to rain for a while." We were right next to a nice sandwich shop. And I said, "Can you eat or have a coffee with me?" And he says, "I'm at the end of my shift. I can do anything, but they won't let me eat in there. They would never let me in." And I said, "We'll fix that. They'll let you in with me." So I would go into the stall next to us, and I buy him a $12 windbreaker and an $8 knockoff button-down shirt. He washes his face in the rain, and his hand flicks his hair back. Next thing you know, he looks like a young businessman. And we go into this sandwich shop, and we spend 2 hours talking about global financing, the importance of his getting an education, the slum he lived in outside of Hong Kong in the island, and all of these other factors. And it was just showing me where the focus of the people is, the breadth and the excitement they have of being able to explore their national economy. It was just very, very significant. Now, there is a parable by Kipling about 6 blind men that come across an elephant, and each one is discovering a different part. The tail, he says this is a rope, and the one with the legs says it's like a tree. The person with the ears, he says it's like a fan. Well, this is the important one. The last one is the one that's feeling the tusk, and he says, "No, it's a weapon, and we must either use it to kill others or we must kill it." I hate to say it, but Hollywood, in a way, in discovering this great unknown, this massive country, which could only be relative to us in size as an elephant, they so miscategorized it in their blindness that they didn't do the best in bringing out the best in the elephant or educating the elephant as to what good we are to them. It was a bit sad. There was a lot of losses.
So do you want to talk just for a few minutes about your understanding of exactly why and how deals with China haven't necessarily gone as well as they might have, and also talk about can you talk about specific deals or specific relationships that have been irreparably broken?
Good. What I would like to do is, keeping in a positive note on this and understanding that Hollywood is Hollywood, I would like to focus on the successful 3 people that I approve of, or 3 groups, and I'll leave the other ones vague. For instance, in the trades, I'll read an interview by somebody that's supposedly leading a company here, and they'll say, "Well, the reason we failed so badly is we underestimated the power of Alibaba and social influencers." They did deals, for instance, with the studios such as Wanda or Hawaii. Well, they needed to know that Hawaii has studios in Jeju, Shanghai, Zhejiang, and Jing. And they also made this big commitment when they were given the freedom to invest in entertainment, to develop existing studios and build their own special new one. And that means if you're going to do work with them, understand what is at stake. The company that did really, I think, they came into it with the best spirit of the deal was STX. STX is a totally different story. They had the best spirit in the deal with Hawaii, and they were being revived with an investment by Alibaba. So the second is Neil Moritz with Fast and Furious. Usually I don't like what the tentpole films do or share in revenue, but Neil Moritz, who I've known ever since he was probably 22 years old, he did leave enough revenue and positivity and long-term legs for investment. And the other is Robert Kane, who's over there doing movies right now. Those are my 3 favorite people. And it was all because they had an appreciation for making sure their partner would be planting the seeds that would give them longevity, and also doing all that they could to respect the culture.
I want to clarify just for a second. Those projects are good, or have been good, or those companies have been doing well because they do less Hollywood accounting, and which means that the partner that they're doing business with benefits financially, but also they tried to build a long-term relationship with China. Yeah. And they didn't say, this is just a one-hit wonder. We just want you for this particular project, and we're going to ditch you after this. Or we're not thinking about the long-term, and we're not thinking about the long-term benefit of the individuals and the companies in China that made those relationships. So they took a long-term approach to the individuals and companies that they were working with in China, and they also made sure that everybody profited financially. And it doesn't even, it's even more important, even if the projects themselves had failed financially, the fact that the relationship had been correct would have made China more willing to work with them. So it's not necessarily even just the economic loss or win. The issue is, are you in here for the long term, and are you going to be transparent from beginning to end? Is that pretty much what you're saying?
Very well said. And you can see this proven by the allowance of the government to allow Hawaii to return back into international film investing, a little bit of a pullback for Wanda. People have to understand why. And there is a new paradigm for China when it comes to entertainment. They're not demonizing Western influence or Hollywood system. They have a lot of honor, and they wouldn't do that. But what they want to do is cut the fake umbilical cord. What I kept telling people, they were talking about, why did the Paramount deal fall apart? And why did this other TV, the Dick Clark deal fall apart? And I would laugh and I'd say, you guys, you're missing the point. They're faster learners than we are. This is a learning curve for them. It's not pulling out of a deal. They realized the deal was bad after a point, and they learned. But it would fall under the umbrella phrase of saying cutting the fake umbilical cord, because Hollywood would allow them to go forward in general, the agencies and the studios, only if they remain dependent upon them.
So I just want to be clear. It sounds to me like what you're saying is that not everybody in Hollywood was saying, let's work together to tell stories that are of global interest or that are globally interesting, and let's work together with our creative partners and our funding partners to do business together. It was as though the people in Hollywood were basically saying, we're the experts, and we're going to give you access to our talent and access to our resources and access to our markets only if and only if we remain in control of the creative aspects of that equation, or we have a lot more creative control than the Chinese do. And so it's kind of like, you'll take what we give you, in a sense.
Our way or the highway, a little predatorial with little caring about the consequences. But you almost read my mind. Next card. I saw this coming because they did this to Japan, Ireland, Italy, Germany, Australia, Russia, and South Africa. I knew it was going to be no different, and that's why I was having confidential meetings. Now, the first of the studios allowed in was Wanda and Fosun, and you have to understand the role they played in the country before they were expanding into malls and theaters, and Fosun was mainly industrial. Wanda was the king of the malls, and you and I talked a little bit about how malls are different there, and they became hubs for family and for cultural learning and improvement of the family. But when they allowed those companies to go from being mostly vested with the government into private sector, there were responsibilities to that. There were responsibilities to stockholders, but also to the image of China and the acceleration of their learning curve. If it had been honored greater by the companies I won't name in Hollywood that really misled them, broke words, just got them into really terrible deals. I'll give you an example. This is how bad it got. I was at a major agency, and an agent came bursting in and said, hey, you're Scott, you know about Asia and China and everything? And we've got this person, and they're from Hong Kong, and they have all this money. And if you have anything that we can do, they won't even know if it's a good deal or not. And I said, well, you must not know very much about me. I'm not going to help you with this. And I was actually meeting with an Asian person there from Vietnam, and he says, good for you. Most people wouldn't have said that. They'd have just said, tell me more. I'd kind of like to make the money. But I was protecting China in that instance, and this happened over and over again. Again, I don't want to name the agency. I'm not going to name the companies that were the worst players. China knows it. And my job now is to smooth things out, and through those books on creativity, help create a new bridge of understanding between the companies.
So you're trying to create the collaborative partnership on the creative side. because right now that doesn't exist, because we don't have a common, they don't know, we don't know the archetypes that they use as part of their storytelling. Just like when we have Robin Hood, we can say, look, it's a Robin Hood character. Their own set of archetypes, and we don't know who they are, and we don't know the rules that govern those kinds of archetypes.
We only know one. We know the seven samurai, which led to the Magnificent Seven. First there was the Seven Samurai, then the Magnificent Seven, and now we have all sorts of movies like Tampopo and others that use their story of the archetype of the seven warriors that specialize in a special skill that save an innocent town. I would strongly suggest people read a translation of Virtue of the Assassins to understand the importance they put on virtue and the sacrifice the heroes make.
So, and actually that probably does feed into the relationship with business as well, because it's the same thing. In other words, they have those cultural archetypes, and if you don't share them, you keep going against the archetypes. And it's like, no, virtue is the beginning. Like, we can't even have a conversation with you unless that's the beginning.
That's so well said. It would be greatly appreciated. See, we'll comment. You know how many times people have brought up the book, The Art of War. Okay, great book. But what about the other couple of books? What about the great writers that instilled so much ethic and virtue and united the country long before the Cultural Revolution, held it together for thousands of years, these very different, essentially what you would call tribes or provinces. And that leads then to what West would understand, which is their business models. You need to understand the difference between the Shanghai Exchange and the Hong Kong Hang Seng Exchange, how they are allowed international trade or not, which one is the people's exchange, how is leverage valued there, because what we need to ensure is the longevity of our partners there. And if we give them a couple of hits that are overpriced that they never get profits back from, and their stock drops, we've done us no favors, because we no longer have a partner there that either exists or is allowed to do business with us. And it was partially through ignorance and just partially through not caring if they're doing well or not, or how their business was allowed to go public. Now, one of the things that we focus on a lot in marketing in the United States is demographics. Of course, we say this is for kids in this age, this is for adults, this is for a woman, this is a core audience for this is women. Well, there's been some talking recognition from about influencers, but also about the MAC, the MAX, the mass affluent class, and also the students. Well, the mass affluent class is seen by Hollywood as a monolith, but it's really a minimum of 5 and 7 different groups. This is something that if somebody meets with me,
and these are you're talking about the mass affluent class and those two classes are demographics that are Chinese demographics that are critical to being able to actually sell media and other things to them. And it's something that most people in Hollywood are unaware exists in the world. They don't even realize that that's a demographic.
Well, they'll say an influencer, and we relate it to Instagram. And of course, they carry it a little bit differently. But then they would talk, if they did speak anything of the Max, they would say, okay, these are the people that have disposable money. They need to know the history of how they got there, the groups that they are now broken into, what's important to them, how are they reflecting their consumption. Because when you really look at stars in Hollywood or the Kardashians or other people, and singers especially, what are they? They're models of consumption usually. And they got into our version of the models of consumption, but then they backed off and says, well, wait a second, this isn't improving me as a person. I want my consumption to reflect what's driving me, because now I want a great marriage. Now I want to be one of the leaders. I want neighbors to point to me walking down the street and say, I'm a virtuous person that took forward the freedom that is labeled liberty with responsibility by the leadership there. We'll give you this liberty, but understand great responsibility comes along with this. And I don't want to say too much more about it, but because that's a long discussion. But here's an example of a betrayal by Hollywood that had significant effects. Wanda was allowed to take a massive loan from various sectors to build Qingdao Studio. You and I talked a little bit about this. One of the most beautiful cities. You could compare it to San Francisco decades ago. on the promise that Hollywood actors and studios would come and shoot there. But once we got our films funded, everybody from the top down, I won't name their names because they'd be the most famous people in Hollywood, then bailed on them, leaving Wanda holding the bag on a really big price tag. And it just got bought out by Sunak. And there's a way to work with this to redeem ourselves for Wanda, to be one of those few companies in Hollywood. I would think people would want to be this company that Hollywood says, okay, these people know, but these 5 people, they are the ones we want you to deal with. We want you to go with STX. We want you to go with, let's do more films with Robert.
Are you saying that the fact that in order for Chinese money and Chinese investment and the whole Chinese market to be available to producers currently working in the United States or currently working in Hollywood, are you saying that there really has to be kind of a complete resetting of how business is done? Like no more fake budgets, no more fake advertising expenses, no more lying about the profits or screwing around with how profits are actually shared. Merchandise deals that work you have to completely remake the way that Hollywood and China interact in order for or whoever does that is going to be more successful, because what happened before was so negative. It basically convinced them that the business as usual means fundamentally it's like we treated the investment they were making in both their time and their money and in their market as something that had no value to us.
Right. Well, we wanted access and we didn't want the responsibility. We should have shouldered the responsibility and said, you're our Chinese brothers now, or cousins. We'll protect you. Now, the gatekeepers to these deals are agencies and studios, and you have to understand how agencies make their money. It's their right. A lot of them, of course, the big ones shifted into major campaigns for entertainment and sports and things. But when it comes to movies, they make their most money by increasing budgets and delaying production. Producers make since you can only have so much of the pie set aside for the producer, this producer maximizes his return by reducing the profits of the other producers, which of course ended up being China. Now, we can't reinvent the wheel in Hollywood. We can steer it. We can take the lipstick off the pig, so to speak, and show what is going on in an honest way, and also recognize that in part due to the 2007-8 financial collapse, studios lost almost all their ability to fund themselves. They're dependent. The weaknesses of Hollywood, if they were fully shared with China, would be probably one of the most enjoyable dinner parties I ever gave, because they would love to hear this stuff. But my job is not to damage Hollywood. It's to give it the lifeline it needs for the creative field I love and you love so much, which is movie making and storytelling. Without belittling anymore the motivation and actions by the gatekeepers that allowed these deals to go through and the major companies that were very misleading but profited greatly. There is going to be a time for the mid-size independents, such as STX, to take the reins now and be part of what I, again, said was the Uberizing of Hollywood. Uber did great things for the taxi improvements, rides and everything else. We can't even imagine life without Uber now. Well, let's look into the future and say we can't imagine television without really great streaming and fast approval. We can't imagine streaming existing without a couple of very decent players understanding why we've been kept out of China in streaming and how to get access to that. Anybody interested in streaming and really making it, whether in Netflix or somebody doing a deal with them and they want this access, you have to understand why the core party and President Xi didn't allow it, just like they didn't allow Facebook. They were able to detect a couple of elements that needed a little special governance. And it doesn't mean that they're going to be censored. It means that the timing had to be changed and some of the root deal making. Now, here's something that we hear a lot about in the United States, especially recently, which is the theft of IP rights. Um, China has addressed this incredibly. They have spent billions with us, and yet they own less than, as far as I know, 10 copyrights that allow them to share royalties, and that has to end. There is hope in the fact that they are learning fast and they're more observant. Now, I'm going to hold something up here right now, just so that I look, so that everybody knows I have a lot of company, not only in the stars, but in independent producers and even studio executives. I've met some of the people at the biggest agencies who secretly say, Scott, you're exactly right. Now, some people might remember this magazine. It was set out at the Oscar time that Birdman won, and it was the year of championing independent films, and they turned their back on all the big blockbusters but one. I was actually in Singapore watching the Oscars at some ungodly hour, like 6 a.m. And they said the theme of that Oscars, led by Gwyneth Paltrow and Jack Black, was fantastic to study. The first thing that they were saying is somebody has to appear out of nowhere and save the films that allow our great acting. It can't all be tentpole films. The second thing that they were hinting to, that you saw in some later interviews, is saying, if, they didn't see the name, but they were saying, if China is our lender of last resorts, for gosh sakes, don't burn them like we did Germany. Treat them well. Please step up with some great deals. They knew what was going on. They knew the way that foreign pre-sales were set up, and they knew that that system, the box office number that used to be dependable on stars from Tom Cruise on down, has fallen apart. It doesn't exist anymore. It's how they got foreign pre-sales and how they were able to go to investors saying, hey, look, foreign pre-sale, you'll get 100% back. Well, what did that mean? Risk is never something that disappears. It is only shifted to one of the players. It ended up being shifted to China. They had to bear the brunt of the risk. It was a little bit like sitting down to a friendly card game and halfway through realizing it, you're sitting at a table of four and three of them are showing each other their cards. So they're cheating, but you love playing with your buddies so much, you keep playing the game and you take a loss. It is something that could have been changed. And now we lead to, what are some of the clues? See, Hollywood has always existed on an energy, and most people don't know this, but energy is not a measurable field like gravity. Energy only gives us clues to the fields, and in this case, it's a financial field, and it's a social vector field of what do we appreciate in movies in the future. I have a note down here as, do you know about Hengda Child World? If you don't, you must understand the emphasis that the country is putting behind Hengda Child World. The problem with the malls in the theme parks in Asia is that the temperature is so extreme, they're either freezing or sweltering. Hengda China World, they're going to build 4 of them, as far as I know now. Evergrande is a big investment, great company. They are theme parks geared for children 2 to 7, but up to 11. And a great emphasis is on teaching them individual responsibility, good role models, the strength of family, appreciation of nature, which includes environment. And they need about 25 rides and 16 kiosks and all sorts of other things that they would like to have be globally appealing. The company that understands this and can bring products to Hengda is doing the nation a favor. The nation will smile favorably on the China studio. The people will smile favorably. They'll visit in massive numbers. They will make the long-term profit that gives their stock stability, especially if it's on the Shanghai Exchange, which doesn't allow too much foreign interaction.
It's basically talking about them creating what amounts to 4 Chinese Disneylands, which, because China Disneyland is kind of focused at that same level. That's why there's no alcohol and so forth. And you're talking
with their
about
character, with their own characteristics.
Yeah, but it's not the same as Disneyland. It's basically, but it's 4 theme parks with rides and experiences and shops and eateries and so forth. Right. And
imagine taking Disneyland, tripling the size, and covering the entire thing. That's what it will be.
So it'll be an enclosed environment.
Yes, completely enclosed. It'll be like the Astrodome. And they'll do the Hengda Child World. I think they're going to do one in Chengdu, one outside of Shanghai. They want to do the second and tier cities also.
And all of these things, will it be like Disney theme parks in the sense that there's a whole bunch of media that goes with it? in
Oh,
order to support in order to support the project. So there'll be films. Disneyland has made a huge career or a huge empire, literally, by creating intellectual property, which fed into rides, it fed into live entertainment, fed into toys and merchandising, and then fed into these theme parks, which earn millions of dollars a year and strengthen the relationship that people in our country and around the world have with those characters. Like meeting Cinderella or shaking hands with Goofy. So you're talking about them creating those same kinds of theme parks in China based upon their own kinds of intellectual property or global intellectual property, since it doesn't have to necessarily be created in China, but
let's say
making that empire.
Yeah, now let's say we were to take a film that I know of. It's called Run for It. It's basically the element of irony is the world's most loser dad unites his family and survives a theme park gone bad. However, the whole movie could be shot in one of the Hawaii or Qingdao studios because it's all done with CGI internally. So you've satisfied one goal. But they would modify, just like they did in the last Kung Fu Panda, the exact look of the characters, maybe their body language in animation, or if it's live action. They might say, okay, we're shooting this for America, but just like in the United States, they shoot a clean version for television. They'd say, okay, now we're going to do one with more China characteristics so that people get it. We're going to change what's in the background even. We're going to swap out some visuals in this so that it's showing something that relates to the Chinese people, and also the 4 comprehensives, the 4 seeds, and the 4 confidences that in succession President Xi has talked about. The 4 confidences, which are the confidences that you have it in yourself to be a good person, a creative person, a leader, look to each other, and you also have the ability to help each other. And if we're staying communist, take communism within yourself as a personal responsibility, just almost like we call a good Samaritan. Their version of Tom Sawyer, their version of, they want to have it be theirs.
Is it, just out of curiosity, are you saying, I want to make sure that I understand this clearly, are you saying that China's focus has become creating content just for China, or are you saying that they want to create pieces which represent a global marketplace? They just want to be involved, they want to be a key player on the creative side. So it's not that they're saying that the $5 to $25 million films that they make are only for the Chinese marketplace. What they're saying is that they're not going to be beholden to the current Hollywood infrastructure, the current Hollywood studios, the current Hollywood agencies. They're going to create these kinds of projects, and they're going to figure out how to create content that the whole rest of the world loves, so they can actually, in a sense, compete with and or take over the traditional independent market, the stories that we traditionally have called the independent film.
Well, they're smart enough to realize that Hero with 1,000 Faces formula works. Look at India. India has 4-hour-long movies. They'll never be super global hits unless they're trimmed down, like some of the wedding pictures and things that we like to see, or Slumdog Millionaire. They understand that many of their cultural movies, especially having to do with that show off a lot of their ancient clothing, they know that that's for their market, but they do want to make these global hits. A good example is Wolf Warrior, which took place in Africa. Mega hit there, even found a strong international market. It was following the Hero with 1,000 Faces. It was Rambo set in Africa, with bad guys being the United States instead of us making the bad guys Russian or Chinese. And they just made that choice. It worked. So they want to do a number of these, but they had a completely original version of our idea of The Hangover, Lost in Bangkok. Wonderful movie, really goofy. And I had a lot of fun watching it. And they want to show the Chinese people, you don't have to look to the West for these fun films, but they also want to say to the world, okay, we're going to come out with this movie. You may see it in Chinese with subtitles or something, or in English, such as the Crazy Rich, that came out recently. Putting Chinese actors in a movie as window dressing is not enough. We have to really go further and understand the goals that they're trying to do in coming forward as a healthy and open country. They've only got a couple more years that they have to pay attention to this. And the little notes here. The other thing to look at is I luckily had a friend who was on the censor board in China that taught me a lot about what gets approved there. But the bottlenecks in the censor board, ideas that the kitchen, most people don't know what the kitchen is in China. I can't go into it right now in the video, but they're not really our adversaries. They're our associates. They're really, if we were to speak more to them rather than try to sneak things by them, it would be a much easier way. And the bridge is possible to get from where we are now into past our bottlenecks. If you're going to be one of the 43 films, how do you make sure you're one of them? How do you become a long-term player like Robert Kane or Neil Moritz in bringing to China maybe a movie that's going to be a good hit here, but they're going to say, cut out this scene, modify this, or add these characteristics to this. The first film that I want to do is one that's going to be set in Singapore. It's going to have me directing and a Chinese director. Every scene will be shot in Chinese and also English. There's a limited number of lines for the American actor, and a lot can be done with good facial gestures. It'll be one of the first films shot in both languages by a Chinese and an American director in Singapore. It should help qualify it for a domestic release. And it has tons of toys. It's really about follows the green movement. So it's got all the things the world wants to see. Young people inspired to take a stand in their neighborhood, improve the environment, save everybody, and show their love for mom and dad.
So you're basically saying that China wants, so in a sense, the United States has always exported its culture through its media. We've had a huge impact on the world dialogue, and we've brought our icons, our Simba, our Lion King, etc. We've brought those people to the world, and we've made that part of the global dialogue. You're saying that China is finally saying, okay, now we're going to do that.
Yeah,
and it's not a competition, but we're going to participate in the world of ideas as peers, not as a second-class citizen.
Very well said again. You really, I love how you listen and then reduce it to simpler terms, because sometimes I ramble a little bit. But we're in the business of staying in business, and so are they. Staying in business means recognizing, hey, Green Gladiators could probably have $500 million worth of toy revenue alone for their first couple of years. It's going to get a big debut there. It's a smart film to do. It's got our political posturing for environmental preservation, which China is very strongly for, also doing the best they can. And they want to be shown in that way. We're helping them and also helping their citizens say, hey, if there's a 5-year plan that's going to make you sacrifice in order to clean up our rivers, let's all go for it in China. Just like we would sacrifice here along our coastline and not build high rises to preserve some of our coastline. For streaming.
Which actually, I want to just make sure something is really clear, that as you discuss the projects that you're currently working on and the projects they're currently working on going forward, what you're saying is that China wants, you're not saying that China is creating content only for China. It does want to participate in the global marketplace. You're not saying that China only wants all production to be domestic. They're totally open to the notion of working with Western collaborators and perhaps partners or co-producers, but what they don't want to do is just be the funders anymore. So right. It's not saying everybody stay out, or we're mad at you, we're not going to work with you anymore. They're saying, in effect, okay, we get this game now. It's a little bit like what Amazon and Netflix did. When they first came in, they were sort of working with other and making only distribution deals. But at some point, they go, okay, wait, we get the game. Now we want to play. They're basically saying, now we want to play.
You can also look at it and say, all right, we got into this because we needed these global hits in our theaters. We wanted to show our audiences. They have made the choice. They want to split it between comic book movies and things that really are endearing to them, funny comedies about people that should never have gotten married, for instance, or something like that, or why they stay together. They say, let's go into this together as a win-win. We've learned enough. Thank you very much. You're not our enemy, but let's accept the fact that we're more savvy now. The government, really what the government, I think, did was they looked at the breadth of investment in entertainment and said, all right, we learned. We made some advancements. Let's come back a little bit. Let's have about 6 months, 9 months of talks among ourselves of how can we do this better? How can we actually not just be somebody sitting down at a casino to play, can we be the casino? Can Hollywood and China both be casinos? Because there's no doubt about it. Films are high risk, and so they want to say, let's manage that risk a little more savvy. We've learned, but we also want freedom to do it our ways in ways we didn't learn yet. We want them to learn from us. If you want in our market, these are the things that are important to us, and give us a little time on the things that you complain about most. We're going as fast as we can. Recognize our achievements, because we don't want to constantly be giving you money and then all of a sudden be slapped in the face saying, you guys are horrible. Why don't you do this better? Well, no, they're actually the distance they have traveled, the billion plus people they've brought into this is an achievement that's going to be reflected in history as one of the great pivotal moves in all societies in the globe. The two great books that sum up the foundation that we could understand would be the I Ching, which is the book of changes, and they're going through a change right now, and the Tao with Confucianism, which is all about balance, yin yang, male, female. The female drive to create something must be married and matched with the integrity and virtue of the male side that gets things done. Nothing in this world lasts long when it's out of balance. It shakes itself apart. And the first equation was unbalanced. We saw the shaking apart of it. When it comes to everybody wanting to get into the streaming market and Netflix wanting to get in there, what is allowed, really dramatic changes in their streaming rulings and live streaming. Again, I'll come back in one case to tentacles being that streaming that fills the gap between television and feature film, but also in groups of slating content that specifically would work good in both nations, which would be explained in a meeting. If a company in the United States has the ability to work with Huawei, Tencent, or call a meeting with Tencent and Alibaba here, it would benefit them for me to be in the room because of the fun cultural exchange and just like you run into a friend saying, hey, I know that person. Yeah, I saw him in Florida. But to them, it's, of course, a combination of these fun, light ideas, but also they wouldn't have to worry that the company they're about to do business with simply doesn't get the direction and the understanding of the core leadership and the direction of the country. I study every speech that President Xi and the core party does, and as many of the analysis and releases of not just the entertainment company, but the leading companies like Honey Capital, Evergrande, Sunak, and others do. And I highlight what applies to the film industry. And sometimes I set it off in red and I type it up. This takes days of study, and you can't get it from normal sources. You can't Google it. You have to know what sources work.
And so the thing is, when you talk about what your company does, your objective is to make it so that people who are doing opening negotiations with Chinese production companies or to do to do production in China using the vast resources that they have, or when you're talking about reaching their markets. Your company, China First, basically says, look, I make this all go faster because I can help you understand what these people need to have in order to say yes. And I think what's interesting about that is right now, let's say somebody wanted to do co-productions with us. So they were coming to us for our money. They really better be aware of what's going on with our presidency. Yeah. They better have a really solid understanding of what's going on with our Congress, what's going on with our whole, cultural milieu, the sort of, the conversation we're having about socialism, because they're entering into that conversation by doing business with us, especially if they're creating media for this market. So in order for us to do business with their country, we have to be as aware as they would have to be in order to do business with our country.
Right. Let's say they were to come up with a film that really slammed any one of the things that's very important to us, such as gender identification. It would bomb in the United States because of the sentiment and this idea that we need to improve in this. Likewise, we present things to them, obviously, that they wouldn't like if it's a war movie or something like that, but then there are other minor things. There's another factor, though. Some of it is the approval process, but deals were entered into by very big companies in the United States that I won't name that they had trouble fulfilling them. Sometimes it wasn't their fault. Sometimes they came up with projects and the actor backed out, or they couldn't get through certain permissions in China. But most of the problems happened here internally, just like the agencies playing their games. There are companies that are a little bit behind in the delivery. I would like to help them come across, let's say, 3 to 6 films, a couple of TV shows that I know China would jump at, that wouldn't go through a bottleneck problem, that has a profit sharing program that is favorable, gives the stock stability in the Shanghai exchange, and has built into it in a subtle way, because Americans and Chinese hate flat out propaganda. They can smell it a mile off. They want to be entertained, but if it does happen to agree with what is important to the youth over there and the government, so much the better, just like finding a strong demographic here.
Well, actually, I was just going to say, I think you just described Disney,
Yeah.
right? Disney does exactly that every single time. It's not an accident that the films that they do, like everything from Pocahontas to the Frog King, etc., all of the projects that they do, even the new Marvel things that they're doing, we all understand that they're speaking for America, the big America, and they're saying stuff. Toy Story, all the Pixar projects, every single one of the Pixar projects stands on core values that we have, and in fact, that a lot of those values are shared by China. So it's not, and that's one of the reasons the content goes worldwide when it does go well, is because it is focused on these things that we agree on, and these things that we agree are good. And so I think when you're talking about helping companies do the $6 to $25 million projects that China wants to do right now, and you're talking about helping companies that have not delivered in the past fix the problem by pitching the $5,000 to $25,000 projects that they can do quickly and swiftly, so they can actually.
There is a benefit. It takes a full understanding of the history of Singapore and some connections there, but there is an incredible advantage to making Singapore the hub, or the third leg in the tripod, for financing and distribution. One of the simplest facts to explain that should appeal to any company is, if the deal, all the way from the script signing over property rights to the producing and funding house, occurs in Singapore, and all of your legwork starts there. It doesn't matter where it films, the United States, anywhere in the world. It could be a Jason Bourne film. Singapore taxes international revenue on merchandise zero. It has a flat 10% tax for the company, but after that, when you get royalties, just like there's special royalties still for authors of books. New Zealand had this. It's why New Line Cinema moved there and closed shop here. We had George Lucas, you and I talked about. He did his latest animation movie there, moved 220 employees to Singapore to make sure he was completely compliant with any tax ruling in the United States. And this allows them to go globally, but also to have a little bit of a more international flavor to the design of the show and the characters, without making it look as if we just dropped a Chinese actor into a movie.
So you're saying that you don't just provide the creative storytelling and the business acumen in terms of how to work with the understand and work with and work with the Chinese ethos, but you also help people understand, who may not be used to doing business internationally, where you have to headquarter your production in order to make that collaboration easy, in order to make it profitable for both you and for the Chinese. Is that correct?
Yeah, and tech giants get this. This is why Google and Apple have offices in Ireland, and they do the Ireland double sandwich, which is a financial term. Singapore is one of the most respected countries for financial regulation. It has the only international copyright protection and IP protection court in the world, with 2 officers from China, 2 from the United States, 1 from Singapore, and 2 from other countries that rotate in and out. They're very serious about keeping things on the up and up. The United States, for good reason, has strong anti-money laundering and know your customer laws when it comes to receiving large amounts of money in the United States. I've come across investors that are completely honest. They've made their money, for instance, in transportation in India, or farming and resorts in Indonesia. And yet they talk to me and they say, we have real trouble getting money into the United States, it's such a headache. They wanted us to hire up to 20 people just for compliance, and we just gave up.
Well, I think there's also, so there's two different issues. If you're getting money from people inside the United States, or you're taking foreign investment and you're bringing it inside the United States, we do have money laundering laws, and as it turns out, maybe for good reason here.
Yeah.
But the difference is that there's people who might want to put money into films, or might want to support helping a film get great worldwide distribution, et cetera. There's all these, but they're not going to put themselves under a microscope going over the course of a period of years to get through the United States money laundering laws. So if you want your production, if you put your production in Singapore, then money can go into that without necessarily passing through, your little funding for your $5 million to $25 million film can go to Singapore much more easily, and it can take money from China and from other places that really just don't want to be under United States microscope over the course of several months or years. They're just not up for it.
Know your customer. KYC probably applies more, because I don't think it's a fear of drug money or terrorism money. It's, you want to know that your customer is an upstanding citizen. And again, I'll use India as a very good example, or Indonesia. Philippines funded quite a bit, but all of these people, they can work with Singapore. They already do a lot of business there, and Singapore vets that person. Then when the money gets, for instance, sent to the United States production company from Singapore, even though the originating source might have been India or France or somewhere else, or Germany even. Well, Germany's pretty well accepted, but Korea is a good example. Then it's treated more like, hey, a foreign company just decided to invest money here. The money's going out in paychecks all the time. There is no opportunity really for money laundering or for bad players. It's just not there. It's just happening. We're in production. That's what I think America would like to see, and I'd like to work with them. But it also does help the Chinese studio, also in an optics sense, saying, hey, we don't want to keep throwing money at a country that badmouths us. And right now, we also, most people don't know this, media was thrown under the technology banner. It's subject to the export inspections and 3 other government regulators, which could determine that you invest in a movie and suddenly you can't distribute it because we're not really sure if it violates our sanctions. Now, I'm not making a political statement or.
Are those U.S. sanctions or Chinese sanctions?
They're almost all U.S. sanctions. China would have more to do with their compliance for making sure there's not financial flight out of China, that the investment is actually going to be an investment that returns money back to China. It's a better way to say it. For us, it's geopolitical.
So China First, your company that handles these kinds of things, in addition to handling the creative side, so you understand how to create truly multicultural or multinational content, and in addition to handling, helping people do business more efficiently and swiftly, and with current politics on both sides of the water in mind, also helps people figure out financially how to assemble the deal in such a fashion that there's not a delay when it comes to moving money into and out of the production.
Right. And here's another good example. By spending time in these countries, from Korea on down. My first film I directed was an English language Korean film starring Koreans, funded by Korea, won all the awards. So I had to start getting used to seeing where they stand or what their rulings are for moving money around. And the TV series Marco Polo was shot mostly in Malaysia. 40% of the budget was covered by Singapore, 40% by Malaysia. The people actually only had to come up with 20% of the budget to have a several season hit that was quite profitable for the investors and made the country look good and got to use their studios. By my knowing this, or knowing the most current allowances in the provinces of China and where their emphasis is in certain districts like Jingjiangji and others that people are unaware of, it helps. It's just like we can go to a bank and get a gap loan for the last $8 million in a movie. Knowing how this works and which countries really pay it off, because some countries will boast about it, like Puerto Rico. Everybody was trying to drive me to Puerto Rico 7 years ago, and then of course they never returned and honored their agreements with filmmakers there when their economy collapsed. But
well, and I think that's understanding particularly how the international aspects of raising money, or not even just raising money, but accepting money, and then taking the income from distribution and actually sending it out again. Those things are very complicated even here in the United States. A lot of people don't understand that, your company, when it's repaying its investors or when it's paying its producers, there are tax implications for everybody. And so,
and legal ones. We had Pathé come under great inspection when they were big in the 80s, I think it was. We had Golan and Globus can't return to the United States. We have other companies that run afoul of things. And actually, the inside stories I know of, I had nothing to do with these films, but films that were great hits that were invested in by very shady money, they sneaked past and then they got stomped on. I don't want to say too much more about that because,
always been a strange relationship between, in the older days, particularly back in the I would say even from the 40s all the way through the 80s and 90s, there was a huge issue with organized crime, literally using it you would set up a production and you would just pay people in cash to actually do the production, and then the film would look really like $1 billion because it really was $1 billion, and then you could actually sell that film over and over. You could sell that film and actually recoup the money. It was a way to launder. Films were a way to launder money.
Well, they were, especially for Russia.
Right.
The Cyprus haircut put an end to that. If you don't know what the Cyprus haircut is, well, you got to study that.
Right. And I think the thing is that when you're talking about working with setting up your production to work with China, you need to understand where China's going to want that production to happen, or where China would prefer to be able to send its money in order to be able to be sure that it's going to get a fair shake on it from the courts and in terms of getting paid back its investments, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, they want to feel secure. Every partner in the equation wants to feel secure. And that's why you're saying people go to Singapore, is because you can feel secure that the courts will actually enforce the laws, regardless of which country the money came from and who the producers came from.
And there was a lot of financial flight, was one of their number one problems in China, as they were trying to value their currency just right. They tackled that, and some went to Singapore, but Singapore got very serious and worked with China. They have a long and encouraged reputation to enforce China laws, just as they do the American laws for people trying to sneak money over there. And this is a way to do this that benefits both countries, both Hollywood and China studios, the key investors. It cuts out middlemen. It allows for the sharing of copyrights in a different way. The enforcement. China really wants to be able to point the finger at a couple of American producers or my company and their hubs, Alibaba and Tencent here, and say, look, we protected the rights of this person very strictly on the internet. We sent people to jail. We didn't just fine them. We put them out of business. We seized their companies. The idea that we're working hard so that you get all the revenue, that ticket sales are accurate. Look, they want to be able to point to some of us and say, these are examples that when we promised your country we're going to do more to protect your copyrights, it wasn't just advanced technology. It was movies too and songs. Look how hard we're working. Ask these people, did we honor the agreement?
They're trying to prove virtue.
Exactly. Ethics, virtue. And what does that result in? One of my favorite words from Greece, it's eudaimonia, which is the flourishing of mankind. We had hundreds of years of blessings of this in the United States. They have thousands of years in their culture. They're getting back to it. I would like to bring that awareness, that fairness into deals. And I'd like to see the long history of Hollywood great movie makings continue.
Well, I mean, actually, I've been passionate for a long time about the fact that media is where we as a country have always had our biggest conversation, our most important conversations, whether it was a conversation, the movie Milk, which made people think about, or recently Bohemian Rhapsody, where people were talking about gender and talking about liberty and talking about creativity. And I think in To Kill a Mockingbird and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, we have our big conversations in this country in media. And in fact, we have our big conversations worldwide in media. So it's interesting to me, the fact that China wants to enter into that dialogue head to head. That's an amazing thing, because that will change the world. And if you think about the UK, it's been exporting Shakespeare as one of its major exports. If you think about its participation in the dialogue and how it has shaped humankind, because we do have Hamlet as an icon.
Well, several years ago, I don't remember the name of it, but it was the
Mhm.
story of two opposing soldiers in the Serbian war caught in the same foxhole, and they're with a landmine that if they move too much, it's going to go off. Neither one of them can escape the manhole unless they work together. That was a great study of how people that are supposedly at war realize they're not horrible people, that they want to survive and go back to their family. In both domestic and international films, as Steve Martin said in his comedy, I can't remember it, all life's questions are answered in the movies. And in a sense, they are.
It's true, though. I mean, that the thing is, we have the big questions are asked and the big answers are found. It's where we have that dialogue. And I like the fact when you talk about, I think it is true that Hollywood, major Hollywood, has abandoned the independent film as we know it. The $5 million to 25. It's big Hollywood studios don't want to do the $5 million to 25 million. Blumhouse does because they're doing its projects. But generally speaking, they want to do their focus is on these $300 million films because that's where they're making most of their money back, and that's where there's room for the kind of business the way they want to do it. But and also that's becoming very homogenized because you have people like Disney buying it, and huge giants are buying these things and they're turning them into continuous business. So the room for a traditional independent film has been abandoned. So it's interesting to think that China might actually enter that dialogue because people love those kinds of films. They're unique. They say something you don't hear otherwise.
Well, look at Juno. Look at all the little films
Right.
we like, and Slumdog Millionaire, and the the way I think of looking at it is that we have to accept the long-standing, I'm saying the last 15 years of funding movies, the way they were being funded either by foreign funds or by selling stock at a studio like Paramount in order to fund $500 million worth of Mission Impossible. That model is no longer sustainable. There will be some people that get by using it. And out of 300 films that are released, there'll probably be 75, 80, 100 that are released that way. The films that want to still find a home that aren't these big blockbusters, a little bit has to deal with the problem with the high cost of advertising, but part of that was inflated.
As you do this presentation, you talk about the fact that you're helping people, your objective is to help people from the creative side who want to create content for a multicultural world that is of interest to China and to Chinese marketplaces. Help them become familiar with the archetypes and so forth. So creative side, the part about teaching them how to do business with Chinese executives and Chinese businesses, and with sensitivity to what's going on in China, the same way you'd need them to be aware of what's going on with our political situations. And then finally, this thing about the mechanics of doing business in terms of where to set up your production company, how to move the money around, how to ensure people get paid, how to register the copyrights, etc. Do you want to talk for a few minutes about how people should reach out to you? Should they go to China? Is there like a website where people should go if they want to reach out to you and say that they want to consult with you to get your advice on a particular screenplay, or get help opening up a particular negotiation, or figuring out how to set up a company because they already have access to Chinese funds?
Well, those are all really good points. The easiest thing is to go to my LinkedIn, Scott Hadley Morgan.
Should they click the connect button and then send you a connect request? Because it's the only way that they'll be able to send you a message, really.
Connect with me that way. You can also call me at my phone number.
Which I'll go ahead and I'll list the phone number on the bottom of the screen so people have access.
They can also contact me through my general email, sitcom.director@gmail. And I encourage this for any company that would either has an existing deal they would like to make better with the Chinese studios or streaming and technology giants. Anybody wanting to get into it or having access to funds overseas that has trouble getting them here. And also people that are a little confused, not a little confused, a lot confused about what flies in China and what doesn't and why.
I'm going to go ahead and edit this up, and then I'll send it over to you to review. And then you can go ahead and then I'll, once it's edited and you say it's okay for release, I'll make it available to the folks that I support. And then I'll give you a copy so that you have access to something that you can share with people as well.
Yeah, and it's going along great. While I was sitting here, you might have heard the dings, and there was people contacting me from our previous talk. Now it's starting to accelerate. And I would love to see this revival of honest funding with really good films. The actors are dying to be in films where they get to act at all ages. Let's bring this on, and it's a wonderful, wonderful meeting again with you, and hopefully we have another.
All right, looking forward to it. And thank you very much. If there's anything I can do to be of service to you, please reach out. And then, but anyway, thank you very much for taking the time to chat with me. It was great.
Thanks. See you again.
Take care, man.
Bye.
Bye.